My name is Pierce Fitzpatrick, or Celtic's Wolfbane, and today I have a very special guest here, the wife and widow of the former WBO champion Tommy Morrison, Trisha Morrison. Hello, Trisha. I would like to first and foremost thank you for coming on to the Pulsing podcast and giving me your time to answer some questions that I have relating to you and your former husband's career.
Great. Yeah, Pierce, hi. Good evening from America. And I think you are in Ireland, right?
Yes, that's correct. It is currently five to eight in the evening on Monday for me. So, Trisha, I have at least 30 questions that I'd like to go over with you in this interview this evening. So, my
Okay.
very first question is, who, in your own opinion, was Tommy's hardest fight that you can
In
remember?
my, yeah, in my opinion, it would probably be the Ray Mercer fight,
Uh-huh.
but then also the Lennox Lewis fight.
Okay. All right. So, I would like to ask, did Tommy Morrison ever consider a career in mixed martial arts at all? Did he ever come to you and say, "Hey Trish, I've been seeing this mixed martial arts thing across television back in the 90s when it was starting." Did he ever maybe consider talking to the big bosses like Dana White of possibly joining the company or just any MMA promotion that was starting off at the time?
It's funny because he did speak to me about MMA. I mean, we used to talk all the time, right,
Mhm.
about everything and anything. And he actually was invited to teach some MMA fighters in San Francisco. So we took a flight there, and he said the basic problem with MMA fighters is they don't know how to use their hands,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
And all I remember him teaching them was how to use their hands. He did one kind of MMA fight, and I know that when he and Ray Mercer got together, because I think Ray Mercer even did an MMA fight, they
Yeah.
talked and they laughed about it, but they didn't really think that it was as good as boxing because it lacked a lot of the hand movement.
Of course, yeah. Ray Mercer actually got inside with the likes of Randy Couture, the former UFC heavyweight champion, and also Tim Sylvia, the former UFC heavyweight champion. So, like in all honesty, Ray was a great boxer. I loved him myself. Now, my next question relates to heels. People that play characters in order to sell seats. Did Tommy ever come to you and say, hmm, maybe would it be a good idea to turn heel in order to sell seats? And say if it did happen, how would you have reacted?
Um, he writes a lot about his boxing in a paperback book that he wrote, My Boxing Career, right?
Mhm.
And he just always would say that he had the ability to sell seats because he was always exciting in the ring. And that's all
Yeah.
he ever mentioned, is that he knew that he was exciting, and he knew that any fan or anybody that was not a fan would always enjoy the fight because it would be full of excitement, and it would people would walk away getting their money's worth, is what he said.
So you don't believe that Tommy actually needed to turn heel in order to be able to sell seats. He was just that exciting on his own. He didn't need a persona in order to be able to try to sell out arenas or try to get more asses in the seats.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
So, my next question relates back to Ray Mercer. How did Tommy cope with that being his very first loss of his career?
Um, he coped with it. He had to take time off from
Mhm.
that fight, and you got to remember, I wasn't actually with him at the time of that fight, so I didn't get a chance to get his immediate feelings. But
Okay.
trust me, he remembered that fight his whole life.
Uh-huh.
So he did take time off for every loss that he did have, especially the Ray Mercer one. He learned something from it. He knew he had to be a better fighter all around. And one of the things from that fight is that when he and I went to the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2010, we actually sat next to somebody who knew the Ref Perez, and he basically told Tommy that ref just froze. He didn't know how to get Ray Mercer off him as he was taking all these unanswered punches to the head.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right. So my next question involves what was Tommy's biggest strength as a professional boxer? Would you say?
Well, I think he would say his left hook
Uh-huh.
was one of his biggest strengths.
Uh-huh.
And he would always say he taught that left hook himself. You know, he didn't give any credit to anybody else. It was him and it was his left hook. So
Uh-huh.
that would be his biggest strength.
So can you name maybe three times where Tommy shared an act of generosity outside of the ring? Was he also known as a very humble and very nice individual outside of the ring? Did he ever do anything that would make a fan's day come true, make a fan's worthwhile?
Yeah, he did. And at the time, it was never actually put out there in the media, but he did a lot of good things for people without even telling anybody. And I'm the one actually on Facebook now that just blasts it everywhere because I feel that people need to know how generous he was. And not with just money, but with time as well, and listening to people and making some of their dreams come true. And fans also shared their stories with me because they were at the other end of that generosity.
Uh-huh.
So you want me to share three things? I can share a lot more than three things, but one of them was he had met a child that came from a family that didn't have any money, and so before the child came home from school that next day, he had filled the house with all the food and everything that they needed without this child knowing. So that was one of them. He also bought wheelchairs for a lot of the vets. He donated money to the Oklahoma bombing victims. You know, I can go on telling you all the kinds of acts of kindness that he did that people don't even know about.
Now, you spoke to me about maybe five times, and especially you also tagged me in a photo relating to an Irish editor from the Irish Times, which is a big sort of news company here in Ireland. And you wanted to get your thoughts and feelings about a specific editor. So you asked me to come on to my podcast to hopefully get this out there and say what exactly you have to say before we continue with the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Piers. Yeah, what happened was that there is, and in fact, I wrote it down here. Let me read it out. There's an editor called Dan, and he works for the Irish Times. And let's just say he's never met Tommy in person. He has never spoken to him. He's never spoken directly to me. But he went ahead and publicized in the Irish Times that Tommy was racist, he was homophobic, and he was a mendacious felon, right? And I had to kind of look this up. I had to Google exactly because I thought maybe I misunderstand what he's writing. So, a racist, as far as he was concerned, that Tommy was prejudiced and he discriminated against
Okay.
people. That's to me that's not right. And then homophobic is that you're prejudiced against gay people. Never saw that happen. And mendacious felon is that he's a lying, serious crime felon who's committed a serious crime like death or whatever. So when you approached me, I thought, yeah, you know what? You're in Ireland. I'm going to shout out to this Dan guy from the Irish Times and let him know that, you can't be writing stuff like this. What are you going to do when Mike Tyson dies? Are you going to do the same? Right? Are you going to wait until people die and then start writing this sort of stuff? So it was kind of like a little sign. Suddenly you pop up from Dublin, from Ireland, and I'm thinking, yeah, maybe this is the time I can use our interview to say, Dan, stop it, right? Don't write stuff like that.
It's
So
that
yeah, that's
it
what
would
happened.
be in a lot of the public's eyes that would be considered defamation of character.
Yeah,
And in all honesty, I've also spoken to a few friends that were fans of Tommy Morrison, big time boxing fans, and they never saw anything in the media relating to this. They did their own research and they never found anything relating to what Dan had said about Tommy. And in fact, I did it myself, and there was really nothing. Tommy was never a career criminal. He hadn't committed any murders, so I believe there what Dan has
right.
been stating is just complete and utter lies. So I'm glad that, even though as small as my podcast is, you're happy enough to give out your talks and your thoughts and feelings about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Just one thing that Tommy always said, and your podcast is perfect, Pierce, because Tommy once said to me, he said, I fought for my fans, would they fight for me? And he meant that, he wanted to know whether Pierce in Ireland would fight for him, Tony in Australia, Hannibal in Canada. He wanted to know if all you guys would fight for him, and you are, as much as you're a small podcast, it wouldn't matter to Tommy because you'd be listening to what
Mhm.
he was saying and you would be fighting for him, for his name. So uh, you know, I thank you very much for letting me and Tommy come into your home. And I just want to know, does Ireland really think Tommy is racist, homophobic, and a mendacious felon? I mean, do you Irish think that of him?
Of course not. When the name Tommy Morrison is brought up, we think of the former WBO champion that lost against the likes of Ray Mercer, but he came back and fought his way to the
Yeah,
WBO and became a world champion. The man that was in Rocky, that was with Sylvester Stallone, we consider him to be one of the boxing legends, and we always will keep him inside our memories and inside our hearts and
great.
thoughts. And in fact, like a lot of people consider him to be a ghost, a greatest of all time, greatest heavyweight of all time. There is people that are in my
Yeah.
country, that are in my college, that do believe that Tommy Morrison is a ghost.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. And you know what? While we're talking about this, yesterday I was sparring with somebody on Facebook, right? And this person was in Pattaya, which is Thailand, right? And he's saying to me, you've been doing this for 10 years. You've been out there. You've been fighting for your husband. You've been telling the truth, stuff that's not in the media. He said, but you know what? You're the only one that cares. And I go, really? I'm the only one that cares about Tommy Morrison in this whole world? Yeah, yeah. There's just only a handful of people that really care about Tommy and what he did and what he didn't do. So why don't you give it up? Why don't you let people, continue to hate him? And I said, no. I said, why are you continuing to talk to me about Tommy if I'm the only one interested?
Mhm.
So, there are people all over the world that think just like you, Pierce. And in the end, just to let you know, after the sparring match, he disconnected himself. So,
My next question is relating to your life. Before you met Tommy, did you have to make any, well, like when you met Tommy, did you have to make any personal sacrifices in order to be able to manage with Tommy and his career?
well, I met Tommy First off, unofficially in 1996 in Las Vegas. And that was unofficially, didn't actually meet him in person, but that's where I got to hear the Tommy Morrison name, right? Then I actually got to meet him in person in 2009 when he happened to check into the hotel that I was working at. And it was a historic hotel, and he happened to be there for an event. And that's where I actually met him in person for the first time. From that moment onwards, when you say if I had to give anything up, I didn't give anything up. No. Um, I think that after the latest pandemic that we've had, I think everybody can fairly understand now what it's like to be 6 feet away from somebody, to not be able to touch anything, to not want to breathe the same air as anybody that's in the grocery store or on the train or the airplane. That was Tommy's life from 1996 onwards. And when he met me, and it was him meeting me, I didn't go out and solicit him. I wasn't a groupie or anything. He happened to just show up in my life. That he actually, I think for the first time, was able to sit down and talk about everything, about his career in the past, what he had gone through, and the adjustments. We didn't make any adjustments. I happened to ask, I had my 30 questions to ask him too. And we carried on moving forward. It was a different career in my lifetime with him because he was no longer in the professional boxing business as he had been.
Okay, well, that's thank you for answering that. So,
Yeah.
I'd like to ask, how did Tommy manage the transition from boxing to retirement, as it is inevitable? How did he cope with leaving the sport that he loves so much?
Yeah, that was horrendous for him. I can't stress enough how horrendous it was. And he, in fact, he wrote a book called My Darkest Years, and he explains in there the stigma. Again, nobody wanting to talk to him, nobody wanting to get near him, that it drove him to drugs and drink. He had to fill a void. You know, there's always a reason why people go on drugs and they drink. It's not because, it's the cool thing to do. For him, he had to fill a void. He had to forget about boxing. He never wanted to look at boxing. And he never wanted to show up at boxing matches if he didn't have to. So it was he was in a huge depression, if you can understand that.
Yeah.
Something that got taken away from him in the blink of an eye, as he said. It was like vapor. It just poof. Everything that he'd always worked for had been taken away from him just suddenly like that. You have to understand that his career, and I've written it down so I don't get it wrong. His career was he started boxing at the age of 7, right?
Right?
And he started training on the front porch. And
Okay.
his amateur career was 290 fights and 21 losses. That's amateur. Then at the age of 13, he then went and did Toughman contests, right?
Right?
And he did 50 of those and lost one. Okay. And then he retired from Toughman contests at the age of 18. And if you have to be 21 to be in a Toughman contest. So here he is retiring at the age of 18 to go back into amateur to finish off winning the Kansas City Golden Gloves, the Western Olympic Trials, the PAL Championship in Florida, and then losing a split decision to Ray Mercer in amateur fighting. Then, at the age of 19, he goes into professional boxing and has 51 3-1 fights, and he gets kicked out of boxing. This is his whole life. Yes, that it was boxing, right? So to be taken out of boxing just as he had signed a multi-million-dollar contract with Don King, it was devastating.
It was.
And then the media, of course.
Mhm. Now, Trisha, there's something that you wanted to talk about, and you said to me that you wanted to mention this, and it is a hard topic to bring up. So I was like, okay, I'll let you mention it if it's completely comfortable. So, like I said, you have the mic now to be able to talk about this topic that is obviously very hard for you. So please
Yeah.
go ahead.
It actually isn't as hard for me anymore because the day Tommy died, I was at peace because there was a post-mortem done on Tommy, and the post-mortem scientifically confirmed that Tommy did not have HIV. So let's go through with what we were told. All right. In 1996, we were told that Tommy was kicked out of boxing because he had HIV, right? And he was kicked out of the fight in Las Vegas. And I'm going to go through quickly some stuff, right? It was a big article for ESPN. That's one of the editors, right, for ESPN. This ESPN writer continues to write in an ESPN article. Since February 10, 1996, when the Nevada Commission said Morrison tested positive for HIV before a fight, the 44-year-old has spent most of his days dodging the diagnosis. And this is that same editor, and she's been doing that since 2013 and actually continues to do that. And then you have other media, kind of like Dan at Irish Times, but also in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is another excerpt from the media. Everything is media driven. And this gentleman from Tulsa World also says when the Nevada officials announced he had tested positive for HIV. So already the media, and I think you had a word for it right before we spoke, already the media is out there saying, that's it, Tommy Morrison has HIV, and he's been dodging the diagnosis since that date. Well, in the last 10 years, especially since Tommy died, I was actually gathering information, even through a lawsuit, on who diagnosed Tommy with HIV in Vegas. The whole media is saying that he was diagnosed with HIV on February 10th, 1996. Well, first of all, Tommy's death certificate does not include HIV or AIDS. And it could have done because I said include it if he had it. So his death certificate says cardiac arrest, septic shock, septicemia, and multi-organ failure. That's his death certificate. Then going back to Vegas, we have an attorney, and his name is Counsel Morrison, and we have a physician called Dr. Robert Voy, and in court records, they say it is important for you to understand that Dr. Voy did not diagnose and never diagnosed Mr. Morrison as HIV positive. And anybody that wants to verify that can go to Appendix B, Docket 283, page 28, lines 14 to 15. And you can see it's entered into court records. Okay, so the doctor didn't diagnose Tommy, and that comes from the doctor's attorney. All right, so I go to the lab who performed the testing, and there is a Dr. Henry Soloway there, and he is the CEO of the lab and was the CEO of the lab in 1996. Well, in his documents, he writes, I conclude that Mr. Morrison was never infected with HIV virus. This is the guy that runs the lab that did the testing. And again, anybody can verify it's docket 136, page 9, lines 27 to 28. Not only does he write that, he also signs an affidavit, which is under penalty of perjury. You know, you go to jail if you lie in an affidavit. So there's that too. Then I go to the state defendants. That's the guys themselves, which is the Nevada State Athletic Commission. That's Mark Ratner, the guy that's on the news, and Dr. Margaret Goodman. Everybody knows these people. Mark Ratner is with UFC. Dr. Margaret Goodman runs VADA, the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association in Vegas, and the Nevada State Athletic Commission are the ones that do the licensing. So in their court records, it states neither the state defendants nor the Quest Diagnostics ever diagnosed Mr. Morrison as carrying the HIV virus, right? And this is them. It's not my words. And it's docket 174, page 7, lines 2 to 4. And again, they state through their attorney general, you can't get any higher in Vegas legally, as stated numerous times, no diagnosis of HIV was made on February 10, 1996, or at any other time by any state defendants. This is Vegas that's saying this, right? So, you know, that's information that's not out there that I keep putting out there. Even the judge himself, and this is a federal court judge, says we wouldn't even be having this discussion if the test was specific for the existence of the virus or not. That's obviously why there's even the possibility of a claim the test didn't test for the virus. And this goes back to 2016, it's the court record. Well, why isn't anybody talking about that? Pierce, that's why I'm on your show, right? And then there's a question that's directly asked to Mark Ratner. Admit you told the media you tested him and found him positive for HIV, and Morrison tested positive for HIV. And Mark Ratner responds, deny. He did not. So where and why in the media are they saying that Tommy Morrison was kicked out of boxing because he tested positive for HIV? Because right now there's nobody, still nobody to this day, and we are in 2024, okay, April 2024, and nobody has come forward in Vegas to say we were the ones that diagnosed him. And in fact, the Nevada Athletic Commission further write in document 217, and they go, this honorable court should not lose sight of the fact that no one diagnosed Mr. Morrison with HIV on February 10, 1996. So they're again telling the judge, hey, you know, we didn't diagnose him with HIV. Okay, so why did he get kicked out of boxing, right, on February 10th, 1996? And why did the Nevada Athletic Commission then file an exhibit TM0015, which anybody can pull up, and they actually lift his suspension on July 11, 2006. And Tommy didn't know about this. So in this 10 years that I've been working on all this paperwork, Tommy never knew about this exhibit. So that is very, very strange. And then what I want to point out is that if there is anybody from the Nevada State Athletic Commission listening to this, which I'm sure they will, and I have no problem because I am just the messenger of their documents, is that a person making false oath in a matter before the commission or a hearing examiner is guilty of perjury, which is a category D felony, and shall be punished as provided in NRS 193.130. In other words, none of these guys should have lied under oath, and this is all in court records. So if they did, they're guilty of perjury. And so that's a little bit about Vegas, right? I wanted to clear that up. Then I wanted to let you know
Before
that
you do,
before,
Trisha, you asked before the interview that how long is the Zoom meetings? They tend to last at least 30 minutes. I just got my
right?
notification that this meeting would end in literally 5 minutes, so it's going to
No,
yeah, so I'm going to be doing maybe multiple part series. So you can guess what the rest of whatever it is that you need to do there for the from the court documents, to
right.
explaining the rest of the diagnosis. So it'll be split into different parts, like part one, part two. So you're completely
Perfect.
fine with that?
Absolutely. Yes. Let's carry on with a part two.
Okay, perfect. I'm just going to end this recording and I will end this meeting and then I'll start a new one and then do an intro saying this is the Pulsing Podcast, part two with Trisha Morrison, widow and wife of Tommy Morrison, the WBO champion. All right, Trisha,
Sounds good.
I will see you soon just there now.
All right.